Yes, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, everyone of the speakers. Actually, we lost a bit of time, but I thought we should. I felt that it was such an interesting thought of a series of presentations that I don't want it to cut in. So I have some questions prepared, but of course, if you have questions to the speakers, you should not be hindered to post them. Just to start our discussion on the panel, I have a twofold question. What is really the damage of piracy? Can you in some way measure the damage that your companies suffer from piracy? Is it possible at all with which techniques to measure the damages of piracy? This is the first question that goes directly to publishing. But the second question is it only a damage to publishers, or is it also a damage, let's say, to libraries? We have many libraries here. Would you agree that libraries suffer from piracy because they lose a lot of usage to illegal players as well? So maybe, and Duncan, you have not spoken for the longest time, so please just give us your ideas on the damage problem.
I think in terms of measuring the danger of piracy, it's in the, how do you put it, in the online world, you can measure usage, you can get an idea of the potential diversion of usage away from your platform. I think it's very difficult to quantify that, to start to say, well, this is directly affecting subscription business. I think you see that in another example we often have is around what happens to subscriptions with, say, green open access. At what point does a subscription journal become, as more and more content becomes available on a green basis, at what point does the subscription not become viable? And I think because you can't sort of, duplicate the real world, you can never really measure that. You can make an educated guess at the sort of effect something's going to have, but I think it's very difficult to get to absolutely quantify those effects. I don't know, Wouter, from your point of view, with measuring that kind of data, you've done a bit more of that in depth. That's something you've got.
Pointy head.
Absolutely, yes.
So yes, I like to measure, and I obviously I can't give the Elsevier numbers, but what we're measuring is that this is not a couple of percentage points. This is actually north of like 20, 30, 40% in certain countries of researchers going to the pirate sites instead of going to the publisher platform. And I think the problem is not just for the publishers, but the problem is that we base our recommenders and all our value-added services on these signals and on these triggers. So I think this hurts in terms of basically our recommenders don't function properly if we don't get the right signals. Secondly, our sales story, like our value proposition to the customers, also doesn't work so well because they say, look, your usage has gone down. And we're like, well, yeah, that's because of this Russian lady. And well, that story also doesn't fly so well. So I think actually the damage is real.
Yeah.
I like the word. I like the word you use. I think, because that's basically still what it is. It's very difficult to measure. Maybe even if we could measure exactly what the usage on Sci-Hub and other piracy sites would be, the effect on subscriptions, the effect on negotiations with libraries, the effect on opportunities with new customers that would be lost. It's impossible to measure. And I think trying to measure that and put all our effort in trying to do that, we better just say, okay, we think it hurts, so we better try to think of a solution instead of trying to prove that it hurts. And I would be very interested to hear a librarian from the audience about how they think about how this influences the relationship between libraries and publishers.
So if there's a librarian with
I know at least one
that's
there.
You're welcome to step in.
For the question, I think it is a very important topic. In the last book fair, I made a panel discussion with partners from publishers and from libraries, and there was an official position from a university librarian who said it was very nice to use Sci-Hub because it could be an alternative to the journals for licensing and subscription. This is not my position. For me personally and for my institution, this is piracy and we do not support it. This is not a kind of a way we can support and act for information and information professionals. The real problem for us is, on the one hand, the legal aspect. This is a matter for us because we do not support Sci-Hub and we do not think it is an alternative. But the second problem is, and this is a very important topic Wouter also addresses in his presentation, it is a way of easy using and very direct, with no digital rights management, complicated access to the information. And this is information for us as librarians, which we have to think about. How we can work together with the publishers, that the libraries and the publishers together can serve the science and the researchers in a very easygoing way to their information. How can we organize it very low level with any barriers, but of course with a legal and professional way. And this is my question also to Wouter. You showed that the bridge between publishers and libraries could be made, or publishers and researchers could be made by the scientific collaboration networks. What do you see the position of libraries? Are they not need anymore in this position? So I would bring in the discussion that the libraries could also play a role as a bridging partner, as a scientific network for scientific or collaboration network for scientific content.
Thank you. This was Mr. Raphael Ball from the Library of the University of Zurich. ETH, yes, ETH. That's. Sorry, Charlie, we did not come to you. So
that's all right. And I think the key points is, first, there's a lot of data that you can triangulate if you want to audit the effect that these sites are having on you. Although, as you say, you might just want to make the assumption and move on swiftly. But between the data that was released by Sci-Hub to, was it to Bastian, and the data that other organisations like ours have gathered in terms of the relative uses of different systems, putting that together with your own data. And so certainly it is possible to estimate what level of usage of your content is happening, and then to correlate that against your subscriptions and your cancellations and so on. But in terms of the effect on libraries, I think somebody touched on the whole issue of the misuse of academic credentials for accessing certain sites. That's obviously an issue that libraries have a big interest in and are potentially at risk from, in the sense of what else might those credentials be used for. And two, of course, as you said, if all the content is available there, what is the role of the library? That's a much bigger conversation, and isn't really specifically about piracy per se, obviously. But I think certainly those are the sorts of reasons why you'll see people in the library community being very engaged with this issue.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chris. I was going to say, I think in this discussion as well, we're also looking at piracy equals Sci-Hub, because let's remember there is also traditional piracy that is still out there, and we know in countries such as Indonesia that there are subscription agents creating fake platforms and reselling content. So there was definite harm there being done to publishers and to libraries. So I think there are still, the more old-fashioned forms of piracy that can quite easily be quantified and quite easily be measured as doing direct harm.
Yes, thanks, Duncan, for adding this, because, of course, we have only part of the picture in this discussion. But in this part, which is, of course, really interesting, this SCN part, Scholarly Collaborative Networks, Collaboration Networks, I heard from all three of you, and maybe also from you, that what you want is not really the stick, but you want the collaboration and the business solution. So the question that comes out of this for me is, will this mean that these SCNs will have a fixed share on our community, scientific community table? And if so, whose share will probably be put away from the table? Will it be, as Mr. Ball suggested, could it be the library, because the contact between the author and the user is no longer going through the library, you'd rather directly through the SCN? Or will the publisher one day regain control again, because making everything open access, and so there is no need for scholarly collaboration networks? What will be your view of the future? Maybe we start here this time.
I think it's the discovery services that are most at risk here, not Google, I would probably exclude them, but a lot of the more traditional discovery services in our sector, because ResearchGate really is a giant discovery service based on individuals and your connections, and what other people you know are reading. And I don't think there's any provider-led service in our community that is offering that kind of really detailed, tailored, personalized approach to discovery. So I think that's a huge risk. If we can sort out the minor business issues, and if we can find a way forward to work with ResearchGate as a community, like I say, I would see us leveraging them as a discovery channel, and that puts the discovery players at risk.
Wim, what do you?
I don't have a real opinion about if ResearchGate or SCNs will be on the table. The function that they have will be for sure at the table. If they will be with publishers or with SCNs themselves or God knows where, and the function will be there, and we will work with that. We have to work with that. That's clear, because our customers are using it and want to use it. Libraries, I think this discovery function of the library will still be very, very important, because just the size of the data set that we're trying to understand already makes that you more and more have to be guided through that. And there will be, of course, more and more systems doing that, but also they have to be managed by someone who is knowledgeable on the information management side of it. And I think that is one of the major roles of libraries in the future. Not so much anymore distributing the content to their people. That is going to be in these platforms that do that kind of services.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I agree with both of you, but I would like to add something which is, I think, the most important piece, because first of all, there are already a couple of SCNs at the table, right? I mean, you already showed in your slides Mendeley and SSRN. Not accidentally, actually, they're Elsevier owned. Why? Because we think they're an intricate part of the publishing, not business, but actually the research business. Researchers collaborating, discovering, and sharing. Now, that's exactly the same as what the library also is interested in. And I think what I find I think the role of the library for me is integration. So I think, and I'm going to be very blunt, a standalone institutional repository with a bit of content is useless. But an integrated institutional repository that has a social layer and that is connected to the community is vastly useful. So I think that the role of the library should be the integration player, and the same goes for the publishers, and the same goes for the SCNs. And I think the integration between the social layer, the discovery layer, and the content layer, that is where the value sits. And I think the library could play a key role there.
Yeah, and I think that's why the infrastructure initiatives you're talking about, like distributed usage logging or article versioning, I think is really important, because it's about being able to integrate another component into that ecosystem. I don't think it's about necessarily displacing one piece or another. It's just adding another pathway to content, another way of finding material. And I think the key piece, of course, is ensuring there's copyright compliance. I mean, I think that's what we all are interested in here, that we can talk to. We're blue in the face about integration and ecosystems, but really, you know, what we want to encourage is compliance. And if we want to bring ResearchGate and other third parties, Mendeley is a great example of something that has been brought into that ecosystem in a copyright compliant way. And I think that's a really good model for the future.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking that we have only 5 minutes to go, and of course I wanted to open to the floor. So I'll put a last question to you, and then we started 10 minutes later, so we might be a bit later at the end as well. So the question I have, of course we have to somehow also have the negative side of piracy discussed here. The Sci-Hub guys have now announced that they shortly will open the whole Google Books database to the free internet. And so my question, as last question to you, is what would you expect to happen first? Sci-Hub offering the whole Google Books full text database for free, or Mrs. Alexandra Albakian appearing under some evident charges before a court somewhere in the world? Maybe, Charlie, you start again here.
Who wants to start with that one?
just to take your question and answer the one that I want to answer like a politician. I don't think it's about Alexandra Elbakyan. She's a figurehead for something else, and she will never face charges anywhere, I don't think. So it would have to be the other one for me.
Don't forget, on Sci-Hub there is already an enormous amount of book content, which makes it even more important also for authors to do something, because the situation with books is different in a copyright sense than with journals, obviously. Well, I think the risk that all the book content in the world will be available for free somewhere, I think that's the basis of your question. Yeah, that risk is that will happen, and maybe it is already like that. I don't know. I can't see if everything is there. So the question is not so much is that true. The question is, can we expect that, and can our models? Can we accept that, and can our models do something to cope with that? And that is more the question than do we think it harms us? Yeah, of course it harms us, but that is not necessarily the problem of the world. That's our problem. So we have to make sure that we understand why that happens, and if we can find a model to suit that apparent need. And that is much more important than trying to fight it, in our view.
I'm going to skip this because I'm interested in questions from the hall.
So is there a question from the floor?
I don't know, but
No.
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are.
I would just say I think it's more likely that Sci-Hub will eat the world first, won't it?
Okay, thank you. So, at least a few minutes for a question for the floor here. The first one, and
Anthony Watkins and cyber research. It's not really a question. I was going to say the early career researchers I'm interviewing in UK and US. One, they are putting most of their stuff after a year, putting it on ResearchGate, second interviews, but they're not actually putting the download thing, is only about half of them, I would guess, even lower. And the other thing is that they claim not to be using Sci-Hub. What they do, they go to Google Scholar, and Google Scholar will take them through, ideally from their point of view, to the publisher site, or the library as they call it, or whatever they say. Not on ResearchGate, yeah, if they can't get it.
That's true.
Well, before we go to the next question, can I make a comment to your comment? Because I think you're absolutely right. So on average, most researchers do not actively share illicit content. However, usually articles are not written alone. Usually you have 10 or 20 co-authors. So usually when you have 10 or 20 co-authors, there will be one co-author that will share that article on ResearchGate. And it only takes one for that article to be shared by all of them. So I think if your average is 50% of the researchers you talk to don't share, well, that means 100% of articles are shared.
okay, please.
Congratulations to you all, because the panel is very interesting and you are addressing a very important topic. But I'm pretty surprised that none of you have mentioned the need of training and academic integrity literacy. My question is, in your view, which is your opinion, in which extent the training and the academic integrity for the newcomers in the university, freshmen, that in 4 years is going to be research integrity when they are PhD students or early career researchers, in which extent this integrity training will solve part of your problem, more than pursuing people? Some of them, they upload a research in ResearchGate because they don't know it, that they have a protection of things like that. Someone of you?
I think it's a very good point, and it's a point that actually the group, the publishers that are working on Sci-Hub that I presented, is picking up. But we would be happy to discuss these things on how to do that in an effective and efficient manner on universities, because I think it's a very important point. And I think as publishers we could also look a little bit in the mirror ourselves and see that we did not do enough about that in the last let's say decade. And I think it's a brilliant point we will pick up.
Okay, the next question, the very last row.
Can I just add a comment on
and
that?
before it comes, there's an addition from Charlie.
Just because I have a quite different perspective, it is a good question. I think as a marketer by training, I've always been trained you just follow the user, or follow what your customer wants, etc. For me, it's not a question of training researchers to do what we want them to do. It's about looking, it's like desire paths or a water course test. Like, what is it that is naturally happening to help information, knowledge be exchanged, get out there into the world, and how do we need to adjust to best facilitate and support that? It's a bit facetious because, of course, there's always a need for some aspects of training, and I take your point that integrity is slightly different to, what people do and how they do it. But I think that's an important point for us to take on board, that this isn't about training researchers to do something different, and I don't think it's helpful if the research community think that's what publishers want here. It's about understanding how we can better support what that knowledge needs to do to be found and read and applied.
Maybe in our product it has to be clearer why integrity, why not compromising integrity is part of that product, and that is I think that's very close to training, to be honest, for ourselves and to show the world what we're doing there actually.
Okay, now the question, the last row, please.
Yeah, hi, Kent Anderson from RedLink. First question before I ask the question that's really on my mind, just to make sure I heard correctly. Somebody said that open access would make these things go away.
That's a very rough translation of what I said.
Okay. But so I wanted. It's also said generally. People do say it out there. I think, but so discuss, because I don't think it's the case. I think that when you get into data exhaust, workflow systems, all the other potential commercial benefits of having a concentration of users around content, if everything's open access, these actually become different, but they're just as potent as they might be now. So,
well, maybe you remember that I said in the same sentence that as long as the licenses are done in the right way and are acted according to, etc., open access is part of the solution. Because sharing, in principle, taking the license, a user license into account, is not with let's say the more general used licenses is not an issue anymore. That doesn't take away that the whole integrity discussion and everything is still there in open access, of course. But in principle, the availability of the content is not due to any copyright infringement anymore, as long as we define open access as copyright is with the author and there is a liberal user license. At least we define it like that.
Okay.
Is that enough, Kent? I was afraid already that was not enough.
So I see
knowing you.
Two last questions, and then we have to end. One is at the left side here from me, from my point, and then you have the last question here.
Okay, thanks. So thanks for the discussion. It was very interesting, and the reflection I made is there are two things which you didn't mention in your analysis, because I agree with the speaker that I don't think you should see Science Hub as a kind of a lunatic Russian sitting on a shabby apartment with her laptops downloading 45 million. There is more going on there, so it is a well-organized thing. But why is it so attractive? Let's try to understand why it is attractive, and the answer is simple. You find everything very easy. I did it myself. I can find everything I'm looking for, and it's for free. Now, you can turn around that 15,000 times, but it boils down to ease of use and for free. So if you want to find a solution, bearing in mind that the digital world is global, you will have to find something on making sharing easy. And I think sharing and piracy are two different things. So I think the ResearchGate is different from the piracy, but you will have to do something about the business model. As long as a researcher can find it for free somewhere, he will do it. And there are examples of the past. You could, I mean, how did the music industry kill the free music movement by coming up with Spotify, with iTunes, and what have you? So I think solutions should. I mean, that's the stick I would go into. I would try to look for.
Yeah, I think the question of ease of use is a really interesting one, because I think, don't you see numbers for Sci-Hub that say, it's still used in countries that have pretty much universal access. So there is a question there about how we as an industry can make our content more easily accessible. Again, I think in initiatives such as RA21, how do we make that stuff work better for our users, I think is crucial here.
Yeah, but I think the challenge that Jean-Claude poses to us, I think goes further than that, and I think you're right. And I think you said the same, Wim, like maybe at some point we should think about why do we need all these different platforms, right? Why don't we have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 big platforms where all that content sits and it's easier accessible? But that's difficult, right? But I mean, I think the reason we're sitting here is actually because we solve difficult problems. And I think that's the challenge you raise, right?
I'd like to make one remark on the music industry, because it's even worse than you say, Jean-Claude. Because Spotify was not started by the music industry itself. It is a disruptor, basically. And we as a publishing industry have to be aware that these disruptors are around. And that if we don't solve the issue ourselves, someone else will solve it for us. So we have to be, and of course I'm not bringing the bad news here for the first time, but we have to really get aware that time is ticking. And we have to do something, as an industry and as individual companies.
Okay, so we have the last question and the last answer, and then we go to the next contribution.
Thank you. First, I have a comment. I am working at a library, so I was triggered by the first question, but we dealt with that. I think it's still important to keep in mind that it's not only about researchers and training of researchers, it's about training of students, and they come in at the age of 18. These are the millenniums. These are brought up in a digital area, and what we find during, for example, information literacy training, is that they make use of everything on the internet, either PDFs, videos, whatever, and they say out and loud and clear, it's on the internet, so I can use it and it's for free. So that's, I think, the most important lesson that we have to learn here, and not only publishers but also libraries and everyone who's involved in here, so also the educators themselves. So that's one comment or remark. I have a burning question, and that reflects also, I think, the issue Jean-Claude was addressing. That is, what would have happened if this Sci-Hub initiative wasn't there? Was the publishing industry capable of reinventing themselves? And was this disruptive, how you say that, development, the trigger to, well, to reinvent or, well, develop new things? So that was my burning question from the beginning.
All right. So the interesting question is, and actually Wim and I differ a little bit in opinion from that, is what wakes us up in the middle of the night? And I think if I ask Wim, it's probably Sci-Hub, and if you ask me, it's actually ResearchGate, and the reason is that Sci-Hub is, for everybody clear, it's a pirate site. Everybody knows you're kind of crossing all kinds of illegal boundaries going to Sci-Hub, and actually I trust that we as an industry will come up with something that is easier to use and better, and the problem is we're slow, but we'll get there. But I think ResearchGate is more interesting because they're partially completely legal, and they're partially illegal, and their legal piece is actually very attractive as well, right? Researchers can ask questions and get questions answered. The profile function, right? There's all kinds of parts there that actually really fulfill a function. And I would argue that it's the combination of free content and a legal layer that is actually waking me up at night, because that is actually truly helping researchers do research better. Whereas I think Sci-Hub is kind of like, yeah, it's a Napster, right? And the music industry was not helped by Napster. I think the music industry was helped by Spotify, which actually added better recommendations, user group sharing, and ease of use. And I think we as an industry are now challenged by I think ResearchGate, academia, and thank God there's also platforms like Mendeley that actually offer similar functionalities, but legally. But the problem is, the playing field is not level. And the thing is, we as an industry need a level playing field where the illegal parties are being sued legally and taken down, while at the same time we also solve the benefit. Because if we're now fighting on a unbalanced playing field, right? The pirates can just roam for free while we have to be compliant. And that is actually very difficult for the industry. I hope this answers your question. So for me, it would be the semi-legal pirates keep me awake the most.
Okay, thanks Walter, and thanks all four of you, and thanks you for listening. And now we are awaiting the next highlight, so we rush down from the stage. Thanks again, and wait for Anke and Annette to contribute.